Houston. Houston, we have a problem. DJ Apollo has landed. I repeat, DJ Apollo has landed.
You are listening to the Tales of Music and Film podcast. My name is Christian Taylor, and thank you for clicking on today's episode. Now, we have a very awesome adventure ahead of us because I have decided that it is time that I cover the original Indiana Jones trilogy from the 1980s because a couple of the movies have anniversaries this year. The first movie out of the trilogy that I'm going to discuss is Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, because the movie is 40 years old this year. Then up next, I will cover Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, because that movie is 35 years old this year. And then lastly, I'll wrap up by talking about Raiders of the Lost Ark, the movie that started this whole franchise. Now, as I said, we're going to be covering Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom in this recording. And this is my mom's favorite Indiana Jones movie, so Mom, this recording's for you. Now, it is no secret that the Indiana Jones movies were my childhood. I have watched all three of the original films religiously throughout my entire life. I could probably recite every line from every Indiana Jones movie. Indiana Jones is my childhood hero. It is no secret. I mean, he is, in my opinion, the greatest male lead in cinema history. I mean, just recently, not too long ago, I finally completed my Indiana Jones costume. I was updating it. I got a new jacket, new button shirt, new pants, and a brand new whip to update the costume and give it a more movie-accurate appearance. And I just completed it this past 3 or 4 months ago, and it looks way better now. And that was always a side project that I wanted to get finished. And I wear that costume like all the time. Any chance I can get to put on my Indiana Jones costume, you bet I'm wearing it. Heck, if I ever have to make a will one day, I am going to write down in the will that I am to be buried in my Indiana Jones costume. If any of my family try to bury me in some boring, tuxedo or suit, I want to come back and haunt them. So yeah, just to show, I love my Indiana Jones costume. I will wear it for the rest of my life. Now, I actually watched the Indiana Jones movies for the first time growing up. I grew up watching them for a good amount of years on VHS. My grandma House is her name. She had the original trilogy on VHS, and she let me borrow them when I was a little kid. And I watched all three of those tapes so much, I'm surprised that they still work to this day. But my town's flea market, before it closed, I bought myself a crap ton of VHS tapes from my town's flea market store. And amongst the hundreds of tapes that I bought, I got the original Indiana Jones trilogy on VHS. I actually recently just got myself a new VCR and hooked it up to my new TV, to my nice TV. And the quality was actually better than what I was expecting, because I always wondered, it's kind of cool to take a step back for a minute and remind yourself how far we've come in movie quality. But the quality of VHS tapes, it was actually better than what I remember. And watching the three movies on VHS again, it was very, very nostalgic for me. Now, when it comes to Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, now I've always had a very, very controversial opinions about the Indiana Jones franchise. The first one is, I love Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. If you want to hear my full review of that film, you can find my Crystal Skull review all the way down towards the beginning of the podcast. That was my third recording, and it was my very first movie that I covered. And I've been defending that movie ever since it came out, and I will continue to do so for the rest of my life, because the hate that amazing film has gotten for the past, 16, 17 years has been outright ridiculous. And I went all in on that recording, trying my very best to defend that movie, because it is way better than what people give it credit for. But anyway, so yeah, the fourth film is amazing. It's my favorite. I'm not afraid to say, like, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, it's my favorite Indiana Jones movie out of the 5 films. I love it, and it's not just for nostalgic purposes. So I've always loved the films. That's always been a very controversial thing. Like, you're supposed to hate Crystal Skull, but me, nope. And the other, another controversy in my opinion is that I actually loved Dial of Destiny. I keep seeing all these videos on YouTube of people bashing the movie, but I actually liked it. I really do. It does have its fair share of problems, but I would watch Dial of Destiny again any day. Now, the third and final one is that this is probably my most controversial opinion yet, is that I consider Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom the weakest Indiana Jones movie. Now, that's not a bad thing. I still think this movie is amazing and it's very watchable. All 5 of them are. But in my case, when you compare Temple of Doom to Raiders of the Lost Ark, Last Crusade, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, and Dial of Destiny, I really do feel like that this movie is the weakest one for some purposes, but we'll go into more detail as the recording progresses, and I'll explain my reasoning as we go along. But still, I love this movie, and I'm very excited to finally get a chance to cover it, so let's get started. Now, the first thing I always like to do is that I like to give a little quick plot summary of what the film's story is about. So in this sequel, Indiana Jones and his sidekick, Short Round, along with his new potential love interest, Willie Scott, after a little exchange, if you will, goes south, Indy and them end up stranded in India, and then they're sent on a mission to help a village that's dying because this evil cult stole their stone that gave their village life, and Indy and his friends have to go on an adventure to Pankot Palace to get the stone back, and then they discover there is this ancient evil that threatens whoever comes into contact with it, the Shankara stone, and you find out it's being held by this evil cult who stole all of that village's children and turned them into slaves, and they're mining underground trying to find the last 2 stones. They found 3, now they're trying to find the final 2 and get the 5 of them back together again. So Indy and his friends have to find a way to get the stone back while saving these children from this evil cult. And it is safe to say that this is definitely the darkest Indiana Jones story out of the 5 films. Like, there is no comparison, like, whatsoever. Like, the story in this film, it's like, I didn't realize as a kid just like how dark this movie really is. And I'll go into more detail, but this movie does have a very deeper story than what I gave it credit for when I was a kid. And up until a couple of years ago, I didn't realize this, but it's like Temple of Doom is theoretically not a sequel, it's a prequel, because this movie takes place a year before Raiders of the Lost Ark. Raiders takes place in 1936, but Temple of Doom takes place in 1935. And that always confused me a little bit when I was a kid, but yeah, this movie is theoretically a prequel. But anyway, the deeper story in this film is that we see Indy go from this kind of narcissistic archaeologist who's only in it for the money and glory, and by the end of the film, he's a changed man who has nothing but compassion for helping others, and thinking about more than just himself. And I didn't realize that. It's a very interesting story that I did not think about that much, but this film has a very strong, important story. And it was very cool to watch. And we'll go more into detail as we progress in the recording. Now, to go into a few facts about the film is that it was released on May 8th, 1984. And of course, the director was Steven Spielberg, probably one of the greatest directors of all time. I think it's safe to say that Spielberg has never directed one bad movie in his life. Everything that guy makes is like box office gold. The movie was on a budget of about $28 million, and its box office was $333.1 million. The movie was distributed by Paramount Pictures and Paramount Home Entertainment. And just to name off a couple of the actors that are in this movie, first off, we have Harrison Ford, probably one of the greatest male actors in Hollywood history. I mean, Harrison Ford, I would say he's a pretty inspirational person. I mean, I to this day, I still have some mixed opinions on him. But I mean, at the very least, I think he's a humble, good guy. And he has had, there is no question that he has had probably one of the most successful, like, Hollywood careers you could ever have. I mean, if you Google him, like, up, in the description, it mentions that he's, like, his films have grossed, like, he's, like, in 7th place for, like, actors who have starred in films that have grossed, like, millions upon, even billions of dollars, like, Harrison Ford has played, like, some of the most amazing male characters I've ever seen, like, Indiana Jones, Han Solo, Rick Deckard, just to name a few. I mean, this guy is amazing. He's a great actor. And I actually have a couple of his movies that I need to watch yet. I just watched Patriot Games for the first time a couple of weeks ago. Pretty good movie. And I also have a movie he did in 1985 called Witness. And that movie is his only Oscar nomination, so I'll have to watch that at some point. I've heard it's a pretty good movie, but yeah, Harrison Ford, legendary actor, and I know for a fact that he's gonna be mostly remembered for playing Indiana Jones. Like, this is like his number one role. I would say Indiana Jones is more popular than Han Solo. I really do think so. Like, Indiana Jones is that one famous role that he will always be remembered for. Now, up next we have Kate Capshaw, great actress. I've only seen her in 2 movies. I saw her in this, and she starred in a Western in 1987 called The Quick and the Dead, starring Sam Elliott. And I actually really did enjoy that movie as well. I mean, I grew up watching, Westerns, and I thought Quick and the Dead, it's a pretty short film. It's only about 90 minutes long, but I thought it was a pretty good movie. But those are the only 2 things I saw her in. She really didn't do that many movies. Like, her career was pretty short. I mean, I think the big reason for why she didn't do that many is because she married Steven Spielberg. Like, she met Steven, obviously, when they were making this movie, and then they got married 7 years later in 1991. I think once she married Spielberg, it was kind of like, well, I mean, I don't have to act much anymore. I can just get my money from him now, so you're just kind of like, well, I guess I don't need to act that much anymore. I think, like, once she entered the 21st century, I don't think she's acted in anything in 20 plus years. But I mean, still, like, she was amazing as Willie Scott in this movie. But I do have another controversial opinion, is that I think the character of Willie Scott didn't necessarily age well with this movie. But like I said, I'll get more into that as well as we progress through this. I even made a slight note of how I really feel about this character. So, up next, we have actor Ke Huy Quan. Now, he is another amazing actor who had quite the amazing comeback in the last couple of years. I mean, this man's story of his comeback in Hollywood is such a inspirational thing. Like, last year's Oscar season, it was the first time in, like, I would say 12 years that I was genuinely interested about the Oscars, because that year, you had him and actor Brendan Fraser both making these epic comebacks in Hollywood and both becoming Oscar-winning actors. Like, that was amazing. And the moment that really, I wanted to shed a tear after seeing this was that Harrison Ford was the one who presented the Oscar to Kay, and they both had this epic hug like on stage, and Harrison gave him his Oscar. Like, dude, almost 40 years after they starred in Temple of Doom together. I mean, you talk about a full circle moment. Like, that was just amazing to watch. Like, I have nothing but the highest respect for both these actors, you know? Just his comeback was amazing. Like, since now the movie that Kay starred in that got him his Oscar win is a movie called Everything Everywhere at Once. And after starring in that, he went on to be a side character in the Marvel hit TV show Loki Season 2. And he also starred in a movie called American Born Chinese. So to see him make his epic comeback and show that he has so much more to give, it was such an inspirational story of him going from this forgotten, child actor to being a mainstream actor. It's such a inspirational story. And the clear message between him and Brendan Fraser's wins was that never give up on your dreams. It's never too late. And that moment of them winning their awards like says it all. It was a beautiful thing to see. But yeah, so there's him, and then we have a few other actors who played. So those are the three main actors in this. We do have a couple of side characters played by actors that I'll mention here right quick. So up first we have Amish Puri, Roshan Seth, Raj Singh, and Dr. Nani Akara. And those are some of the side actors who are in this movie. So now we're going to be getting into some information here explaining why this movie has such a darker tone. So Spielberg later recalled that when Lucas first approached him for Raiders of the Lost Ark, George said, "If I directed the first one, then I would have to direct a trilogy." He had 3 stories in mind. It turned out George did not have 3 stories in mind, and we had to make up subsequent stories. Both men later attributed to the film's tone, which was darker than Raiders of the Lost Ark, to their personal moods following the breakups of their relationships. In addition, Lucas felt it had to be a dark film, the way Empire Strikes Back was the dark second act of the Star Wars trilogy. Spielberg has said the danger in making a sequel is that you can never satisfy everyone. If you give people the same movie with different scenes, they say, "Why weren't you more original?" But if you give them the same character and another fantastic adventure, but with a different tone, you risk disappointing the other half of the audience who just want a carbon copy of the first film with a different girl and a different bad guy. So you win, you lose both ways. And I have to agree with that 100%. Now, I did a little bit of digging years ago, but there is one thing about the story of Indiana Jones that kind of drove me a little crazy that I wish they hadn't went this route. But it seems that they decided to go the James Bond route of having Indy having a different love interest with each movie, and I didn't like that idea very much. I mean, I never liked that in James Bond to begin with. And I thought it was kind of funny because, James Bond was part of the inspiration for Indiana Jones because after finishing up Jaws, Steven Spielberg met up once and Steven told George that he wanted to do a James Bond-esque movie. And that was when George showed him his notes that he had for a character called Indiana Jones. And this meeting actually took place while George was away on a trip because he was skipping out on the opening of Star Wars New Hope because he thought the movie was going to bomb, and then it went on to make, millions of dollars. But I thought it was so cool that him and Steven met up and came up with the idea of this legendary character of Indiana Jones, but I never did like that idea of Indy having a different love interest. I didn't like that. I wish that it's my personal opinion. I wish that Marion had been the main girl in all three movies. Because, for example, for any of you Indiana Jones fans, I'm sure a lot of you listening to this have played the Uncharted video games by game company Naughty Dog. All four of those games are, I can't even put into words, like, it's literally modern Indiana Jones. Like, that's who Nathan Drake was. He's the main character of the story. And Nathan's love interest in all four games is Elena Fisher, and she's the main girl in all four of the games. Now, Nathan does have a different love interest in Uncharted 2, but Elena still comes back, and they get back together by the end of the game, so she's in all four of the games. Now, as far as I'm concerned, Nathan and Elena's love story is they are, in my opinion, like one of the greatest couples in video game history. The games did such an amazing job of developing their relationship, especially in the fourth game. Like, just when you keep thinking there's nothing else that could be explored, each sequel just keeps making the relationship better and better. Part of me wishes that was what Steven did with the sequels to Indiana Jones. Now, I read somewhere many, many years ago that there were, during like the very early drafts of Temple of Doom, they were going to originally bring back Marion Ravenwood, and I don't think the movie was going to take place before Raiders, because that wouldn't have made any sense, because in Raiders of the Lost Ark, it's confirmed that these two have not seen each other in 10 years. And so yeah, that would have really screwed up the continuity. But anyway, I wish that they had found ways to have Marion be part of the sequel stories. But I still love the movies regardless. I mean, I've said this time and time again. Like, I'll definitely be saying this a lot when I get to Raiders of the Lost Ark, but Marion Ravenwood's like one of the greatest female leads in movie history. She is the best girl in the entire Indiana Jones franchise. I mean, like, what do you have to compare her to? You have Lily Scott, who is a damsel in distress the entire film of Temple of Doom, and I think she only helped Indy out like once or twice. She constantly has to be saved throughout Temple of Doom, and it's like, for example, if you were to do a drinking game where you have to take a shot every time Lily screams in Temple of Doom, you'll be passed out drunk before you even hit like the 40-minute mark. Like, she screams her head off the entire movie, and it's just like, can you stop? So it's like, yeah, Marion and her are not comparable in any kind of way. Like, Marion handles herself throughout the entire film of Raiders. She never needs Indy's help. Like, once in a while she does, but I mean, she handles herself just fine, and she always has Indy's back. And then the other girl is Elsa from Last Crusade, who is a backstabbing person who will betray anyone to get what she wants, and on top of that, she's a Nazi. So, yeah, those are your two other women, and these two don't even get close to Marion's status. Like, Marion was the best girl, and I will wish sometimes, I wonder what it would have been like if Marion had been the main girl in all the movies. But anyway, that was just me ranting a little bit that I wish they kept Marion a main girl in the story. But anyway, now going back to the notes that I read earlier, is that Steven Spielberg actually does make a really good point. It's that there is a lot of pressure on a director to make a sequel, you know? Because, like, imagine, like, Steven and George Lucas, for example. Raiders of the Lost Ark, the first Indiana Jones movie, and Star Wars New Hope, both films were the first of legendary trilogies. They did extremely well, right? Now, you're under extreme pressure, right? You have to recapture that magic again. And you have to find a way to somehow try to up the ante and try to make it better than the first. It's like, how do you do that? Like, there are way more bad sequels out there than good ones. But in this case, Temple of Doom and Empire Strikes Back both did an amazing job. Like, I think Empire is the best out of the main Star Wars trilogy. But, other great sequels like Terminator 2, Aliens, like these films were tasked to try to surpass the movie that came before that did extremely well. Like that's, like you're in a very tight, situation. And on top of that, you have to find a way not to tell the same story again, because you're going to have fans saying, well, this is just a copy and paste. And then you have the other half, like if you try to do a different story, they'll be like, they just want to copy and paste of the first movie. So it's like either way, you're not going to win everybody over with this film. But you can't please everyone. Like, I saw this, firsthand with the Disney Star Wars trilogy. Now, look, another controversial opinion. I know, I have tons of them. I liked the Disney Star Wars trilogy. I liked them. I really do. But I remember when each film came out, it's like, first off, you had Star Wars The Force Awakens, where a good majority of the fans complained that the movie was a copy and paste of New Hope, which in some ways it is. I get the criticisms. But then Star Wars Last Jedi comes out, and then everybody was complaining that this film was too different and nothing like, the original trilogy. When you have these same people complaining just 2 years prior that Force Awakens was too much like New Hope. So it's like, okay, people, what do you want? And then, Rise of Skywalker tried to repair the, quote, damage that Last Jedi did. And then the story just went all over the place and it really fell apart. But anyway, so I witnessed that very thing firsthand. You can't please the entire fan base. You're always going to have this section of people who are not going to be happy no matter what you give them. So I fully understand where Steven Spielberg was coming from, with that comment, and I can't imagine the pressure you're under in making a sequel. But going back to the notes, so Lucas came up with ideas that involved a religious cult devoted to child slavery, black magic, and ritual human sacrifice. Lawrence Kasdan of Raiders of the Lost Ark was asked to write the script. I didn't want to be associated with Temple of Doom, he reflected. I just thought it was horrible. It's so mean. There's nothing pleasant about it. I think Temple of Doom represents a chaotic period of both Lucas and Spielberg's lives, and the movie is very ugly and mean-spirited. Lucas hired Willard Huyck and Gloria Kaz to write the script because of their knowledge of Indian culture, and Gunja Din served as an influence for the film. Now, they were not wishing to feature the Nazis as the villains again. Executive producer and story writer George Lucas decided to regard this film as a prequel. 3 plot devices were rejected before Lucas wrote the film treatment that resembled the final storyline. As Lawrence Kasdan, Lucas's collaborator on Raiders of the Lost Ark, turned down the offer to write the script, Willard Huyck and Gloria Kaz, who had previously worked with Lucas on American Graffiti, which came out in 1973, were hired as his replacements. Now, I did some research here, and this is a segment I'm pretty excited to talk about. We're going to be doing some trivia here about some of the things that happened while they were making Temple of Doom. So, this first one I want to talk about here. Now, I'm sure that we are all very aware of the infamous bug room scene where Indiana Jones and Short Round are walking in the dark. They keep hearing crunching noises, and Short Round's like, what the heck are we walking on? So Indy lights a match, only to find out the entire floor they're walking on is covered in all kinds of insects, ranging from very small to extremely large. Now, I'm sure for any one of us, including me, I would have ran out of that room like a like an Olympic runner. Like, I would have been out of there ASAP. I hate bugs. Like, insects are freaking terrifying. I can't say that enough. Insects, dude, they are the stuff of freaking nightmares. Like, that scene was terrifying. And then, of course, we have the kind of comedic relief scene of Indy and Short Round are now trapped in this room with the ceiling dropping, and then spikes come out of the ceiling. So Indy is yelling at Willie to come down into that room and open the door back up. And Willie has to walk through the room of insects, and then she has to reach into this area that's covered in bugs to pull the switch to reopen the door. And during this whole sequence, Willie is completely covered in bugs, and they're all real, by the way. Like, that's the part that got me. So, for the bug chamber sequence, Kate Capshaw was really covered with over 2,000 insects. She took sedatives prior to the scene to get over her big fear, and claimed they definitely worked. Like, dude, I gotta give some credit to Kate. Like, that has to take some serious guts. Like, oh my, I don't know if I would be able to do that. Like, oh, dude, that scene just grossed me out. I hate bugs so much. Like, it's insane what actors will do to get a performance out, but man, that's some next level commitment. So, next note here. So, Dr. Neniyakra, as I mentioned earlier, he was a side character in this. He was cast to play the Indian village shaman, and he did not speak a word of English. He delivered his lines phonetically by mimicking Steven Spielberg, who was promoting him off camera. The pauses in his dialogue were therefore not for dramatic effect, but rather waiting for his next line. No, I thought that was kind of a cool little technique there. I think it's kind of crazy to think of. Like, you watch this movie, and it's like, you can imagine just like a few feet to the right, Steven's like giving him his next cue to say his next line. That's just so crazy to me. Now, this next note that I'm going to read to you really shows you what a very genuine good person, Harrison Ford is. He's not this, mean guy that he's portrayed in by the media. Not really. So this story is about him and his co-star, Ke Huy Quan, who played Short Round. So during the interview, he remembered how his co-star, Harrison Ford, he remembered how kind he was towards him when he was a child. He says, he was an amazing guy, so down to earth, so humble, and really generous as an actor, and he taught me how to swim. We were just hanging out at the swimming pool in Sri Lanka in our hotel, and he said, "Kay, do you know how to swim?" I didn't. So he says, "Come on, I'll teach you." Now that is a very heartwarming story. It just shows you that Harrison is a very caring person. Like, I read a story once about an event back in like 2015 or something where So Harrison Ford, he's a very good pilot outside of acting. He likes to fly. And I remember reading a story once where he was out flying and he found a stranded hitchhiker, and he flew his plane down and picked him up and brought him back to safety. I think it was something like that, but he has saved, lives before. And he's a very caring, good guy. He's not this mean old man. Like, not really. I mean, he has had his moments, but I mean, some of the moments that we've seen of him getting angry, I think they were it was, deserved. But anyway, it seems to me that he's a very caring, good guy. I think he just puts on this persona of this rough old man who doesn't care, but I think he's the exact opposite. And this, so now, as we continue through the notes, this film is actually banned in India, and it's never been shown on TV channels in India, like, not once. And I actually have a note later on that we'll go into, but this film did stir up some controversy. So, Kate Capshaw was very critical of her own character, saying that Willie was not much more than a dumb, screaming blonde. Well, I mean, she was a little more than that, but I mean, Kate, I do have to agree with her to an extent. I mean, Willie was just, this woman who you can tell comes from a rich family who's never had to work hard a day in her life, and this whole film she complains and moans about everything. Like, she gets just a little bit of dirt on her, or her dress gets damaged a little bit, and then she's just like, oh my gosh, the horror, it's just like, you can tell everything's been handed to her on a silver platter. She's never had to work hard once in her life. So I think she was. Part of me's wondering if she was ready to be like comedic relief throughout the entire thing, but I just found her to be extremely annoying. But we'll get more into her character here in a minute. So going back to the notes, famous actor Dan Aykroyd, he has a cameo in this. And it took me many, many years to realize this, because I remember there were many times I would look up the cast list for this movie, and it kept showing Dan Aykroyd. I'm like, wait a minute, where the heck is Dan Aykroyd in this film? And then I saw somebody leave a comment saying he played the guy that led Indy and Willie in Short Round to the plane, and he was talking with a British accent. Then I saw a behind-the-scenes photo of Dan Aykroyd and Harrison Ford. I was like, holy cow, I never realized that. So I thought it was kind of cool to figure out like where the heck Dan Aykroyd was in this movie. But Dan, the character he plays, is his name is Weber, the British ascendant man who escorts Indy, Short Round, and Willie onto the cargo plane. Aykroyd had previously worked with Steven Spielberg on the film 1941 that came out back in 1979. And these next notes that I want to read to you here, it seems that some of the crew had cameos in this movie that I had no idea. Like, I want to go back now and rewatch Temple of Doom and see if I can find them, but George Lucas plays a missionary in the background in the airport scene at the beginning. Kathleen Kennedy, she played a dancer in the background in the airport scene at the beginning. Frank Marshall, a tourist in the background at the airport scene at the beginning of the film. Spielberg plays a missionary in the background at the airport scene as well. So it's like all these people who worked on the film are background actors at the airport. I kind of want to go back and see if I can pick them out. Now, here is another note that I wanted to read off here. So, while shooting Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, Harrison Ford injured his disc, but continued to film his scenes, so he injured his back. I believe what happened, now don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure what happened was that when they were filming the fight scene where Indy was fighting the big bad guy, they made it onto the rock escalator thing, and during the fight I think Harrison Ford threw out his back, and they had the whole production while he recovered, and but he continued to film his scenes. But seeing him in pain, Lucas had to shut down production and sent Harrison to the hospital for recovery. And there's actually a couple of scenes in the film where you can clearly see that they had to find stand-ins for Harrison. A prime example of this was going back to that chamber scene with the bugs. Once Willie pulls the switch and enters and the door opens, she runs back inside the tomb and she's screaming and freaking out because, again, she's covered in bugs. And then she leans down and pushes the button, and when she leans down, if you pause the scene, you can clearly see that behind her, it's not Harrison Ford, it's a stand-in actor. It's kind of funny. I mean, it's pretty quick, but there's like 5 seconds there where you can tell it's not Harrison Ford. But those are some of the cool little notes on stuff that's featured in the movie. Now, the next thing that I wanted to talk about here is that I think that this movie did get a little too goofy at certain parts. And this is one of the main reasons why I consider this film to be the weakest out of the 5 films. I mean, the silly scenes, some of the over the top stuff, and the character of Willie Scott are my 3 problems with this movie. Like, this movie had a lot of goofy moments, and like the first one for me was the whole plane sequence where Indy, Short Round, and Willie have to. Now, this scene doesn't bug me very much, like not necessarily, but they have to jump out of the plane in a life raft because the bad guys took all the parachutes. So they jump out of the plane while the life raft is filling up with air, and they hit the ground, and everything's fine. But I like how so many people were okay with this scene, right? But everybody had a huge problem with the fridge sequence and Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, and I just thought that was ridiculous. I mean, it's like, guys, compared to everything else that Indy's been through in these films, is it very that far of a stretch that he survived a nuclear explosion in a fridge? I mean, like, can you just it's still a cool scene, just expand your disbelief. I mean, so many things happen throughout all the films that don't make sense, but for me, I just don't care. But the whole plane scene with the life raft I thought was kind of goofy. And of course, you know, we have the famous scene of when Malaram is doing the ritual at the underground cult temple, and he rips out the dude's heart. And, you know, there's just, when you watch that scene, it's like you have so many questions. Like, first off, how is this guy still alive? How is he breathing still? His heart was just ripped out of him. But he's just sitting there breathing, no problem. Like, you would die, like, the millisecond that heart is ripped out of you. You know, like, and then, you know, he's still breathing and everything. They lock him in this cage, right? And then they lower him down into the pit of lava. And then, while he's being set on fire, his heart is burning while Malaram is holding it in his hand. And you're just like, wait, what? You know, it was very, like, over the top. You're just kind of like, okay, like, what the heck is happening? And another thing about the film that didn't age well, in my opinion, was some of the scenes featuring Short Round. Like the scene of him beating up a lot of the henchmen. Like, this, like, he was, like, Short Round's like a 12-year-old little boy taking down men that are, like, half his height, right? Who are, like, in their 30s, and he's just whacking them with wood, right? And they're just falling down. Oh my gosh. You're just kind of like, okay. You know, this is kind of silly. Like, Short Round's just, you know, screaming and yelling, jumping in, beating up bad guys. And, I mean, it's cool at certain parts, but there's a lot of times where it's like, yeah, in real life, these guys would have whooped his butt instantly. You know, but it's just kind of like, you know, like, whatever, just go along with it. But, now, the cart chase sequence, I thought it was kind of cool, but there's this one moment, right, during the cart chase sequence, where I'm just kind of like, okay, this is kind of silly, was where, so the bad guys chasing Indy, Willie, and Short Round and a cart behind them, they try to grab Short Round and pull them into their cart. And during that sequence, like, they're pulling him one way, Indy and Willie are trying to pull him back in the cart, and we get this overhead shot of the carts driving alongside one another, and then it's like, you can tell they were using, like, this doll for that sequence, and the legs and arms are stretching, and you're just like, wait a minute, I didn't know Short Round had Mr. Fantastic superpowers. You know? Like, I'll never forget, me and a couple of college buddies, we were watching Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom in our dorm room. And I remember that when we were watching the film, I was like, guys, get ready for this. Like, I want you to pay attention. Like, watch the sequence with the rubber dummy they use. The arms and legs stretch out. And the minute we got to that point, we all started laughing our butts off because, like, I forgot how silly that sequence is. You know, it's just kind of like, what the heck happened? You know, like, was there a malfunction with the dummy they were using for that particular part? I don't know, but it was just kind of really silly, but I mean, it doesn't last very long, and you can look past it. And the last thing I thought was kind of over the top was Malram's death at the very end of the movie. So what happens, the final battle is that Indy and Willie in Short Round get trapped on a bridge over a cliff, right? Bad guys are coming at them from both sides, so Indy tells them to strap themselves to the bridge, and Indy uses a sword and cuts the rope, and the bridge splits in half, and they fall down, leaning over the cavern, right? And then Indy and Malram have their final punch-out fight, and then out of nowhere, Indy gets the upper hand by saying this like ritual to Malram, and then you're just kind of like, okay, where did Indy get this from? It just shows up completely out of nowhere. He just starts saying like this ritual thing. The stone starts to light up for some reason. It gets red hot. Malram just randomly grabs it for some reason. It burns his hand. Then he just randomly lets go of the bridge and he falls to his death. And you're just kind of like, what happened? You know, I just failed to understand, like, why did he let go of the bridge? Why did he grab the stone? Where did Indy get this, you know, ritual sayings from? And why are the stones lighting up and becoming lava hot? Like, I don't get it. It just seemed completely, like, out of nowhere. But, I mean, at the same time, Malram really did deserve that death that he got. He fell to his death into a river filled with, you know, with crocodiles that were going to rip him to shreds. I mean, this guy and his men were torturing children. And it's like, once you do that, man, you're the ultimate villain. There is no redemption arc for you. Once you cross that line of harming children, you're past the point of no return. Like, you are not capable of being forgiven for that. Like, that's where I draw the line. So, I thought he deserved what he got. Now, another thing about Temple of Doom that I was just kind of itching my head on was that it kind of has a continuity problem, because Temple of Doom takes place a year before Raiders of the Lost Ark, and we have that scene, right, where in Raiders, Marcus comes over to Indy's house to tell him that the Army Intelligence has hired him to recover the Ark of the Covenant and bring it back to the U.S. And Indy's all excited about it. He starts packing up his suitcase. And then Marcus is telling him his famous little, you know, monologue saying that, Indy, this is not like other artifacts you've gone after before. This thing is dangerous, and who knows what kind of powers it has, you know. And he's like, Marcus, what are you trying to do? Scare me? You sound like my mother. You know me, I don't believe in magic and all this superstitious hocus pocus. I'm going after to find an incredible treasure. You're talking about the boogeyman. And it's like Indy's saying, I don't believe in magic and all this. Meanwhile, literally the year prior, you literally witnessed a cult ritual where a man ripped out a guy's heart and he was still living. And you're just kind of like, and you saw the stones glow when they were put together. It's like, Indy, you literally witnessed magic just a year prior, and you saw it firsthand. Like, what do you mean you don't believe in that stuff? You saw it before your very eyes. Like, that doesn't make any sense. And this continuity problem continues with Dial of Destiny, where Indy tells, you know, Helena on the boat, you know, I don't believe in magic, but a few times in my life I've seen things that I can't explain. Well, it's like, Indy, it's kind of magic. I mean, like, you witnessed, you know, the Grail Cup bring your dad back to life after being shot. You witnessed, you know, ghosts and spirits come out of the Ark of the Covenant, and you saw stones give a man power to rip out a man's heart, and that man still lives. You know, it's just kind of like, after everything you've seen, you still don't believe in magic. Like, really? I just don't understand, like, I just don't understand that whole, you know, I don't believe in magic thing. But anyway, that's just kind of a small little continuity problem. Now we're going to be getting into more. I want to go into more detail here for a minute about the character of Willie Scott. So my problem has always been it's just like Willie was a little too whiny in this movie. You know, it's just kind of like I just kind of wish they could have gave her a little more to do in this movie. You know, because it just seems like the entire film she's just screaming like all the time. And the older I got, the less I liked her, you know? But up before Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny came out, I considered Willie to be the worst character in the franchise. But now, she has been dethroned. And now the worst character in the franchise is Helena Shaw. And I have covered Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, and Helena Shaw is the worst character in the entire franchise. I mean, it's the truth. Like, she's the worst. But anyway, like, Willie's a better character than Helena. Like, at least Willie tried to help. And at the very least, she had Indy's back the entire film and never betrayed him or left him to die like Helena did. It just seems to me that Willie just kind of seemed like a helpless victim throughout the entire movie. But she does get better. Like, during the last, like, hour of the film was when she really got better. But, man, that first half of Temple of Doom, she was just the absolute worst, in my opinion. And some more notes that I found, it says that Kate Capshaw's performance as Louis Scott has often been criticized for its shrillness, with Kate Capshaw calling Willie not much more than a dumb screaming blonde. And she further added that she was blindsided by the reaction to her character. The thing that surprised me the most was that the critics, women's critics in particular, were very critical of Louis Scott as if we were making a political statement and I was doing nothing for my sisters. I found it odd that it was an action-adventure film and we were meant to be doing message work. Now, I mean, I don't think the movie was trying to do any messages or anything. You know, it was just an action-adventure film. But the movie did have an important message of doing the right thing and that human life is worth more than any amount of treasure or artifacts. You know, like, that's the message that I get from this film, is the growth of not being a narcissistic jerk and being a caring person and doing the right thing and saving lives. You know, that's what Indy goes through in this film, of becoming a careful guy who does the right thing and lets go of his pride of being this cool archaeologist, and instead he chooses to become a hero and saves a village and brings all the children back home to their families. But like I said, I mean, I just think the first hour of the film really was extremely bad. But once she's saved by Indy from being sacrificed, like, once Indy saves her from that ritual, she becomes way better. Like, I love the scenes where, like, she helps kids get their chains and locks off of them. Like, when Indy's fighting the big guy, like, Willie hands him an object to use to hit him with, you know, and during the cart scene towards the end, she punches the bad guy that he falls back on the tracks, and the cart runs into him and the cart goes flying off the rails. And then she saves a Short Round towards the end of the movie where he falls through the bridge and she grabs him and pulls him back up. So she does a lot of good in this film. Once we get to the last hour, like I said, she has a lot of character growth. So she wasn't all bad. Like I said, it was just that first hour. You're just kind of like, oh my gosh, Willie, can you stop screaming for 5 seconds, you know? But now the next thing that I want to talk about here are some of my favorite scenes in this movie. Like, dude, I was so obsessed with the Indiana Jones movies growing up. Like, I wore the costume every time I watched them. And I would act out the scenes, the dialogue, the fight scenes. I did it all, man. And I had an absolute blast. Like, one of my favorite scenes to do was the big fight scene in Temple of Doom where Indy's fighting the big guy. And that was so much fun. Like, it was just, I had a great childhood, man. It was just great. Like, that's one of my favorite scenes in the movie, was when Indy was fighting the big guy. And then I love that shot where Indy's beating him up and then Short Round's beating up the kid who's using voodoo magic to torture Indy. Like, that's like the John Williams score kicks in, and we see Shiro and Indy punching back to back, with the bad guy they're fighting. Oh, it was so just breathtaking to see. It's so good. And the opening, the whole opening scene with Indy, Willie, and Short Round escaping those mobsters, like that was a pretty cool scene too. But although I thought it was kind of funny how, like, Indy knows. So, context for you: the movie opens up with Indy in Shanghai, and he is getting ready to do a diamond exchange where these mobsters hired him to find this ancient artifact, and he shows up wearing a James Bond-esque tuxedo and sits down to do an exchange with them, but it goes really south because they had no intention of giving Indy that diamond in the first place. So so the exchange was, okay, Indy, you give us the artifact, we'll give you this precious diamond. But they had no intentions of giving it to him in the first place, and Indy thinks that he's won, and he takes a drink out of one of the glasses, and kind of find out the guy's poisoned his drink, and now they said, okay, you're going to have to give us the diamond back in exchange for this antidote so you'll live. And I'm just kind of sitting there like, Indy, you know how dangerous these mobsters are. Like, I remember one time my mom and I were watching this movie, and I brought up this, like, you would think he knows, like, how dangerous these mobsters are. Like, literally the night before the exchange, like, the mobsters sent one of their men up to Indy's, like, room that he was staying in to try to steal the artifact from him. And it just shows you, like, these guys have already backstabbed Indy once. And it's like, Indy, you should not be trusting them in any kind of way. I wouldn't be drinking or touching anything on that table. Just, you would think that he would think, okay, I know how dangerous these mobsters are. I am not drinking anything from this table. Like, you would think. Like, even as a kid, it was kind of bugging me. Like, okay, you know how dangerous these mobsters are. But anyway, the whole exchange goes south. A giant brawl, follows. And Indy and Willie escape the restaurant by jumping out the window. And Short Round drives up in the car, and then they escape, and then the mobsters chase them, and then Indy has, like, this little gunfight shooting at the cars. It's just pure Indiana Jones action magic. It's amazing. And let's see here. And also, another favorite scene of mine was that bit where during the cart chase where where Indy gets knocked down in the car by that one guy. He starts to crawl up in the car, and then Willie just socks him right in the face. He falls on the railroad tracks, and the car, and the villains in the other car run into him, and it derails them. They go flying off the cliff. It's just like, oh, that was amazing. It was finally awesome to see Willie get her turn to kick some butt. Like, that was amazing. And another scene that I absolutely loved was the scene where Short Round wakes up Indy. So, about halfway through the movie, so here's some context for you. Indy, Willie, and Short Round get captured by the cult, and then the cult forces Indy to drink this blood that brainwashes him and clogs his mind into thinking that he's now a member of the cult, and then Short Round escapes and finds where the ritual is taking place. They're getting ready to sacrifice Willie, and then Short Round shows up, grabs the torch, and burns Indy, and it snaps him out of this possession that he was in. And Indy grabs Short Round, pretending like he's getting ready to kill him, but then Indy winks at Short Round, showing, hey, I'm alright, kid. And then they turn around and start fighting the bad guys, and the Indiana Jones music kicks in. Oh, that whole sequence is just so freaking good. Oh, it's amazing. And dude, the ending scene where Indy uses his whip, and it wraps it around Willie, and he pulls her back towards him to get a kiss. And then Short Round's riding a elephant, right? and the elephant sprays water all over him. Oh, it's so good. And then Indy and Willie kiss, and then the kids start surrounding him. You know, oh, it was so good, man. The ending was amazing. Like, the families are reunited at the village, and Indy gives the shaman the Shankara stone back. Oh, it was just amazing, man. There are so many good scenes in this movie. While trying to pick out my absolute favorites, it was a struggle, but I had to give a shout out to those scenes. But so this next big talking point that I want to get into here is that this film, I remember I mentioned earlier in the recording, is that this film did stir up some controversy. And this controversy still exists to this very day. And the controversy in question has to do with how India was betrayed or depicted in the movie. So, the depiction of India caused controversy, with the film being not released in cinemas in the country, as the film received a temporary ban in India. The film was later released in the country when it came out on home video. A small protest group of around 30 to 50 people in Seattle, Washington, appeared in the local newspapers when they protested against the film for depicting Indians as either helpless or evil. The depiction of Indian cuisine was heavily criticized, as dishes such as baby snakes, eyeball soup, beetles, and chilled monkey brains are not Indian foods. Now this of course is talking about the infamous dinner scene, which was another scene that I thought was extremely silly, but that scene was only doing a purpose of trying to show the viewers that there is something wrong going on here at Pankot Palace. Like, this scene is trying to show you that there's something wrong with the people here, where it's like, wait a minute, this is normal to you guys? You actually eat this stuff? It wasn't trying to betray the culture as, like, this is factual. That wasn't the case at all. They're just trying to convey that there's something very weird and messed up going on here. And I think the scene accomplished that with flying colors. I don't think it was trying to, like, prove a point or portray something in a negative way. I think that was the last thing on any of the crew members' minds. But, so the notes continue with, professors such as Yvette Rosser have criticized the film for its portrayal of India, with Rosser writing, it seems that to have been taken as a valid portrayal of India by many teachers. Such a large number of students surveyed complained that teachers referred to the eating of monkey brains. Another heavily criticized aspect was the film's white savior narrative, with Indiana being depicted as a great white hero upon landing in a remote Indian village, with the villagers unable to help themselves. Roseanne Seth, who played Chatterlell, mentioned that the banquet scene was a joke that went wrong, saying Stephen intended it as a joke. The joke being that Indians were so smart that they knew all Westerners think that Indians eat cockroaches, so they served them what they expected. The joke was too subtle for that film. In his autobiography, Amish Puri expressed the whole controversy around the film as silly. He wrote that it's based on an ancient cult that existed in India and was recreated like a fantasy. If you recall those imaginary places like Pankot Palace, starting with Shanghai, where the plane breaks down and the passengers use a raft to jump over it, slide down a hill, and reach India, can this ever happen? But fantasies are fantasies, like our Pankara and folklore. I know we are sensitive about our culture identity, but we do this to ourselves in our own films. It's only when some foreign directors do it that we start cribbing. And the controversy doesn't end there. This actually affected the filmmaking in a way. The filmmakers were denied permission to film in North India and Amber Fort due to the government finding the script offensive. Producer Frank Marshall explained that originally the scenes were going to be shot in India at a fantastic palace. They required us to give them a script, so we sent it over, and we didn't think it was going to be a problem. But because of the voodoo element with Moharam and the thuggies, the Indian government was a little bit hesitant to give us permission. They wanted us to do things like not use the term Mohara, and they didn't want us to shoot in a particular temple that we had picked. The Indian government wanted changes to the script and final cut privilege. As a result, location work went to Kandy, Sri Lanka, with Mati paintings and scale models applied for the village temple and Pankot Palace. But the budgetary inflation also caused Temple of Doom to cost $28.17 million, $8 million more than Raiders of the Lost Ark. Filming began on April 18th, 1983 in Kandy and moved to Elstree Studios in Hertfordshire, England on May 5th. Marshall recalled, when filming the bug scenes, crew members would go home and find bugs in their hair, clothes, and shoes. 8 out of the 9 sound stages at Elstree housed the filming of Temple of Doom. Lucas biographer Marcus Hearn observed Douglas Slocum's skillful lighting helped disguise the fact that about 80% of the film was shot with sound stages. Now, that's pretty crazy, to think about, but I think the crew did an amazing job of working around the problem that was presented to them, where they were denied access, to the locations that they already had planned out. But, to think on the spot and how to fix it, I mean, the film looks incredible. Like, it looks like, they did shoot at those locations as originally planned. They did a dang good job building those stages, man. I mean, never once did I ever think that, man, this feels like a fake location, So, hey, kudos to the casting, kudos to the crew for what they accomplished, man. Like, they did a fantastic job with this. So now, let's look at what the movie won award-wise. So, Dennis Muren and Industrial Light and Magic's Visual Effects Department won the Academy Award for Best Visual Effects at the 57th Academy Awards. Soundtrack composer John Williams was, as he had been for his work on Raiders of the Lost Ark, again nominated for Original Music Score. The visual effects crew won the same category at the 38th British Academy Film Awards. Cinematographer Douglas Slocum, editor Michael Caine, Ben Burt, and other sound designers at Skywalker Sound received nominations. Spielberg, the writers, Harrison Ford, Jonathan Kakwan, Anthony Powell, and makeup designer Tom Smith were nominated for their work at the Saturn Awards. Temple of Doom was nominated for Best Fantasy Film, but lost to Ghostbusters. Now, I gotta tell you, man, 1984 was a big year for movies at that time. I mean, just right off the bat there, we had Ghostbusters, we had this movie, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, and other movies such as Karate Kid, the original Red Dawn, Supergirl, and Police Academy. Like, there was a lot of good stuff coming out, that year. A lot of stuff that's still extremely well to this very day. Now, one of my favorite reactions to this movie is Quentin Tarantino. He actually said that this is his favorite Indiana Jones movie. So, director Quentin Tarantino has stated that Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom is his favorite of the series, as well as Steven's second best film behind Jaws. Spielberg pushes the envelope. He creates PG-13, a movie so badass it created a new level in the MPAA, further adding, there is a comedy aspect as gruesome as the cinema is. There is an ultimate comedy aspect that's just not quite there as much in the first one. I thought that was a very interesting take. And then another man named Dave Keir stated, The film betrays no human impulse higher than of a 10-year-old boy trying to gross out his baby sister by dangling a dead worm in her face. Ralph Novick of People complained that ads that say this film may be too intense for younger children are fraudulent. No parent should allow a young child to see this traumatizing movie. It would be a cinematic form of child abuse. Even Harrison Ford is required to slap Quan and abuse Capshaw. There are no heroes connected with the film, only two villains. Their names are Steven Spielberg and George Lucas. The Observer described it as a thin arch, graceless affair. The Guardian summarizes it as a 2-hour series of non-too carefully linked chase sequences. Sitting on the edge of your seats gives you a sore bum, but also a numb brain. Leonard Milton gave the movie only 2 out of 4 stars, saying that the film's a headache-inducing and never gives us a chance to breathe, and chiding the gross-out gags. Now, I mean, I wanted to take a minute, and just kind of read some, quote, reviewers' takes on the movie. Like, I really enjoyed Quentin Tarantino's, depiction of it. I mean, this movie is fantastic, and I think those other reviewers were just way too negative towards the film. Like, I don't think he deserved all that. There's a lot more to this film than just the gross aspect, But for me, it's the movie of a man going through a huge change of going from this, this guy who only... So, like, Indy, at the start of the film, he's like James Bond, right? Where he's in it for the gorgeous women, the going on adventures, finding the artifact, getting all the fame and the attention. By the end of the film, he's a completely changed man who got extremely beat up, but he let go of his greed and all the other stuff to do the right thing and save the day, and he held the village, and that is what's really important to me, is the message of doing the right thing. And this movie, even though it was a lot darker and grosser compared to the other films that were before and after, this movie is an amazing, pre-sequel, if that's what you want to call it. But there's a lot more to this movie than just the gross aspect. Like, that, I can assure you. But that's about going to wrap it up for the covering of Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. I hope that you really enjoyed this recording. Like I said, I love this movie. I would rewatch it right now. And it's a great movie. I still think that it's the weakest out of the 5 movies. But again, this is just my opinion. But I still love this movie, and I had no intentions of bashing this movie in any kind of way. With this recording, I just wanted to get everything out that I liked and disliked about this, as I would with any other movie. So I hope you really enjoyed this, and I hope you learned some very cool facts about the movie and the making of it. And I just want to personally thank you for taking time out of your day to listen to this, and thank you for your support while I continue to work this amazing dream of being a podcaster. I hope you enjoy the content that I give you, and I hope you enjoy what you're listening to. So, until next time, my name is Christian Taylor, and you are listening to the Tales of Music and Film.